No warning, no anomaly on the radar, no record that should not exist. On a quiet summer day in Tokyo, immigration officers encountered a man whose presence would quietly become one of the most unsettling mysteries of the 20th century. Not because he threatened anyone, not because he caused chaos, but because, according to his own documents, he came from a country that did not, and still does not, exist. He arrived like any other traveler, calm, well-dressed, confident. He spoke fluent French, understood Japanese, carried himself with the ease of someone accustomed to crossing borders. When asked for his passport, he handed it over without hesitation. That was the moment everything stopped. The document appeared authentic. Official stamps, travel visas, signs of repeated international movement. But the country listed as his origin was unfamiliar to every official in the room. Taured, not a city, not a region, a nation. When questioned, the man showed no confusion, only irritation. He insisted Taured had existed for over 1,000 years. When given a world map, he pointed precisely to a location between France and Spain. The place where, in our world, only a small country called Andorra exists. To him, Andorra was the mistake. What made the situation more disturbing was not just the name of the country, but the consistency of his story. He carried currency from Taured, banking documents, a driver's license, business papers referencing companies that, in our world, existed, yet had no record of him. There was no panic in his voice, no attempt to flee, only certainty. For the authorities, this was impossible. For the man, it was incomprehensible that anyone would doubt him. And as the hours passed, what began as a routine immigration check quietly transformed into something else entirely, a case that would blur the line between fraud, myth, and the terrifying possibility that reality itself may not be as stable as we assume. This was not the story of a man who claimed to be special. This was the story of a man who believed the world around him was wrong. The longer the questioning continued, the less the man's story unraveled, and the more unsettling it became. Immigration officials expected contradictions, hesitation, the subtle cracks of a lie told too many times. None appeared. Instead, every answer aligned perfectly with the next. His passport showed stamps from multiple countries, entry and exit dates, official markings that under normal circumstances would have passed inspection without a second glance. The paper felt real. The ink aged. The details were precise, yet none of it should have existed. When asked how he had traveled so freely if his country was unknown, the man grew visibly frustrated. He explained that this was not his first time in Japan. According to his documents, he had entered the country before, more than once, without issue. If Taured were fictional, he asked, how had international authorities approved his travel repeatedly? There was no good answer. Officials contacted the company he claimed to work for, a real company, based in Tokyo. The business confirmed its existence immediately. But when his name was mentioned, the response changed. No employee, no contractor, no record, as if he had never been there at all. Still, nothing about him suggested panic. He carried money in multiple currencies, financial documents from institutions that did not appear in any registry. Even his driver's license listed Taured as a nation, complete with formatting consistent with legitimate government identification. At one point, a world map was placed on the table. Show us where you are from. Without hesitation, his finger landed between France and Spain, exactly where Andorra is located today. That was when his composure finally broke. He stared at the map in disbelief. To him, Andorra did not exist. In that location, there should have been Taured, a sovereign nation with borders, history, and diplomatic recognition. He accused the officials of altering the map, of playing some elaborate joke. From his perspective, it was the world that was lying. As night approached, authorities were left with a problem they could not resolve. The man could not legally enter the country, yet there was no clear evidence that he had committed a crime. So they made a decision that would transform this strange encounter into legend. They placed him under guard and booked him a room for the night. The hotel was not chosen at random. Authorities selected a nearby building, controlled and monitored, with no external balconies and no accessible escape routes. The man was escorted to his room under supervision. His personal belongings, passport, and documents were confiscated and secured at the airport. 2 guards were stationed outside his door. There was, by all official accounts, nowhere to go. The room was several floors above ground. The windows did not open. The corridor was watched throughout the night, and yet by morning the man was gone. No signs of forced entry, no disturbance in the room, no evidence of escape. The guards insisted they never left their posts. No one was seen entering or exiting the room. The door had remained locked. For investigators, this was no longer a bureaucratic anomaly. It was an impossibility. As officials scrambled to understand what had happened, the situation became even more disturbing. When they returned to the airport to review the man's confiscated belongings, those were missing as well. Every document, every form of identification, the strange currency, the passport from Taured, all gone. No security breach was reported. No logs explained the disappearance. And no one could explain how evidence secured in a restricted area had simply vanished. Within hours, the case shifted from an internal incident to an unspoken problem. There were no press releases, no public statements. The event was quietly buried, mentioned only in fragmented reports and second-hand accounts. And that silence is where the legend began. Stories spread slowly at first. A man from a country that didn't exist. A locked hotel room. Guards who swore they saw nothing. Theories followed naturally. Dimensional travel, parallel universes, slips between realities. Because if the man was lying, how did he disappear? And if he was telling the truth, what did that mean for the world he stepped into? For years, this version of events stood unchallenged, not because it was proven, but because no alternative explanation seemed capable of closing every gap. Until decades later, when something unexpected surfaced. Not another witness, but a name. Years after the story of the man from Taured began circulating, researchers started asking a dangerous question. What if the mystery wasn't supernatural at all? What if it had simply been misunderstood, buried within old court records, newspaper clippings, and parliamentary transcripts? A name surfaced, one that did not belong to any interdimensional traveler. John Allen Kuchar Zegrus. Unlike the legend, this man was very real. And unlike the story, his encounter with Japanese authorities did not occur in 1954, but in 1960. The date shift alone would later prove critical in transforming a criminal case into a modern myth. Zegrus was arrested in Tokyo not for claiming to be from a non-existent country, but for attempting to cash large amounts of fraudulent checks. During the investigation, authorities discovered that he was a seasoned con artist who had traveled extensively, often using identities and documents he created himself. Among them was a passport, not a standard one. Descriptions of the document varied, but witnesses agreed it was unusually large, crudely constructed and filled with invented details. The issuing country was listed as Taured. Its capital, Tamanrasset, a real city located in Algeria, repurposed to lend credibility to fiction. To complete the illusion, the passport contained text written in an invented language, just enough structure to appear official, just enough ambiguity to delay immediate dismissal. Zegrus didn't just rely on paperwork, he relied on confidence. He claimed to be an intelligence agent. At different times, he described himself as working for Western agencies, Middle Eastern governments, or covert international operations. His stories were inconsistent, but delivered with conviction. And conviction, especially in bureaucratic systems, can be powerful. The Japanese press took interest. So did British authorities. In fact, the case was formally discussed in the UK Parliament in July of 1960, not as a paranormal incident, but as an example of how easily passports could be forged and abused. Yet something strange happened after that. The facts faded, the timeline blurred, and the legend began to grow. Because while Zegrus was real, the story people wanted was something else entirely. John Allen Kuchar Zegrus did not vanish from a locked hotel room. He was tried in court. In August of 1960, Japanese authorities formally convicted him. When the sentence was announced, 1 year in prison, Zegrus collapsed in the courtroom. Witnesses reported that he shouted threats of self-harm and injured himself with a concealed piece of glass. He was restrained, treated, and eventually served his sentence. There was no escape, no sealed room, no guards left behind in disbelief. Afterward, he was deported to Hong Kong. His wife was sent back to South Korea, and from that moment on, Zegrus disappeared in the most ordinary way possible, not through dimensions, but through history. No further records, no confirmed sightings, no documented death, and that absence created space. Because when facts grow quiet, imagination grows loud. Over time, key elements of the story began to change. The year shifted from 1960 to 1954, distancing the event from official court records. The criminal charge faded from memory. The hotel room became sealed. Guards were added. The disappearance turned impossible. What had once been a case of fraud slowly transformed into a perfect mystery. The media played its role. Early articles referred to Zegrus as a mysterious foreigner. Later, retellings removed his name entirely. Internet forums, blogs, and paranormal websites embraced the most sensational version, not because it was accurate, but because it was irresistible. A man from nowhere, a country erased from maps, a reality glitch hiding in plain sight. And soon, the original explanation felt boring by comparison. Why accept a clever con artist when you could believe in a traveler between worlds? The man from Taured became less about what happened and more about what people wanted to believe was possible. But that raises a deeper question. If this was only a legend, why did it endure so powerfully? And why do so many details still refuse to fully align? There is a reason the story of the man from Taured refuses to disappear. It doesn't rely on monsters. It doesn't require violence. It doesn't even ask you to believe in the impossible outright. Instead, it exploits something far more unsettling. Bureaucracy, passports, stamps, hotels, guards, paperwork. These are the systems we trust to define reality, to decide who exists where they belong, and whether they are allowed to cross invisible lines on a map. When a story slips through those systems without explanation, it feels like reality itself has malfunctioned. The man from Taured legend survives because it is quiet. No explosion, no chase, just a man who insists the world is wrong, and then vanishes. Psychologists describe this as a cognitive gap, a moment when the brain cannot reconcile two conflicting truths. Either the system failed, or reality did. And for many people, the second option is more interesting. There is also timing. The legend gained traction during the Cold War era, a period defined by secrecy, espionage, false identities, and distrust of governments. The idea that authorities would hide something impossible felt plausible, almost expected. Then came the internet. Forums amplified the story. Details were copied, altered, repeated. Each retelling smoothed over inconsistencies and sharpened the mystery. The more it spread, the less anyone questioned its origin. And crucially, the story never offers closure. No body, no confession, no final answer. Even when the name John Zegrus enters the conversation, it doesn't fully satisfy, because his disappearance from records feels eerily similar to the fictional one. He becomes a shadow either way, a man without a country, a man without a confirmed past, a man without an ending. So the legend persists, not because it is proven, but because it is incomplete. And incomplete stories invite belief. But there is one final layer most retellings ignore, one that makes the case far more disturbing than a simple hoax. Even when stripped of its paranormal framing, the case still leaves behind uncomfortable questions. Because John Allen Kuchar Zegrus was not a careless criminal. He traveled internationally. He crossed borders repeatedly. He passed inspections that should have stopped him immediately. His forged passport, while flawed, worked, not once, but multiple times. That alone exposes a vulnerability most people prefer not to think about. How easily authority can be convinced by confidence, structure, and appearance. More troubling is how quickly the official record dissolves. Despite court proceedings, despite parliamentary discussion, Zegrus fades almost completely from history after his deportation. No confirmed death, no traceable life, no follow-up documentation. For a man who attracted international attention, his disappearance into obscurity is unusually clean. Some researchers suggest intelligence involvement, not because he was a spy, but because he claimed to be one. During the Cold War, such claims triggered quiet interest. Files were opened, questions were asked, and sometimes records were sealed. Others argue something simpler but equally disturbing: embarrassment. Governments rarely publicize how easily their systems fail. A man inventing a country and moving freely through international checkpoints is not a comforting narrative. Letting the story drift into myth may have been convenient. And then there is Taured itself. The name does not appear in official history, but it resembles real places, real languages, and real geopolitical structures, just close enough to feel familiar, just wrong enough to be dismissed, which leads to the most unsettling possibility of all. Not that the man came from another universe, but that the systems designed to define reality are far less solid than we assume. The mystery, then, is not whether Taured exists. It's how easily something false can behave as if it were real, and how quietly truth can disappear when no one is watching. Over decades, as the legend grew, historians, journalists, and curious minds sought fragments of truth. Some chased old newspaper archives, others tracked court records and immigration files. And in every case, a thread of reality existed. A man named Zegrus, traveling, forging documents, claiming intelligence work, moving through Tokyo, and finally disappearing into historical obscurity. But the legend refused to die. Why? Because it operates on an emotional truth rather than a factual one. The man from Taured represents something primal, the fear of the unknown. The idea that the world is larger and stranger than our maps suggest. And when people hear the story, they instinctively ask, what if? What if someone could slip between realities? What if we aren't fully in control of borders, passports, and identities? What if a single person could bend the rules of our perception and vanish? It's also the storytelling itself. Every retelling enhances drama. A locked hotel room, guards who saw nothing, a passport from a country that doesn't exist. Every detail is carefully constructed to maximize disbelief and tension. The human mind naturally fills gaps with speculation, turning fact into legend. Even modern forums and videos continue this pattern. Each version is slightly altered, edited for engagement, reshaped to fit contemporary fears and fascinations. The more the story spreads, the less the line between Zegrus and Taured matters. And yet there is a subtle, haunting consistency. A man entered Japan. Authorities investigated. The case became international news. He disappeared from public record. No one can fully reconcile the man who existed with the myth he inspired, because legends do not require proof. They require mystery. They require silence where an answer should be. And in the man from Taured, that silence became louder than any fact could ever be. The story of the man from Taured has inspired countless theories, some plausible, some fantastical. One popular idea suggests he was a time traveler, accidentally arriving from the future. The odd dates on his documents and the inconsistencies in his travel history fuel this theory. Some claim he was glimpsing a timeline that no longer existed, a shadow of a world slightly different from ours. Another theory leans on parallel dimensions. Advocates argue that Taured could exist in a reality adjacent to our own, and Zegrus slipped through a thin veil between worlds. His calm demeanor, knowledge of languages, and unusual composure add to the mystique, a man out of sync with his environment, appearing as though he belonged somewhere else entirely. More grounded explanations focus on pure deception. Zegrus was a master con artist, crafting a passport and backstory, sophisticated enough to fool immigration authorities. Perhaps he intended only to cash forged checks, but the story grew beyond his control, morphing into legend. There are also government conspiracy theories. Good authorities have deliberately covered up details. After all, a man navigating international borders with falsified documents, seemingly unchallenged, could embarrass bureaucracies, Quietly letting the myth spread might have been safer than admitting systemic failures. And finally, some scholars suggest the legend endures because it speaks to a deep human desire, the fascination with the impossible. We are captivated by stories that challenge the rules of reality. A person vanishing without explanation, a country missing from maps. It triggers curiosity, fear, and imagination simultaneously. No theory fully explains Zegrus, Taured, or the peculiar circumstances surrounding that July day in Tokyo, but each hypothesis keeps the story alive, fueling debate and wonder across decades. Because in the end, the man from Taured exists as much in imagination as in history. And maybe that's exactly why his story refuses to fade. Even today, the man from Taured remains an enduring symbol of mystery. Not because the event itself was extraordinary, the facts are mundane. Zegrus was a con artist. He traveled, he forged documents, he vanished from official records. But the way the story has been retold transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. The locked hotel room, the guards, the non-existent country, all added later, all designed to provoke disbelief and fascination. Legends survive because they answer a question our brains love to ask. What if? What if a man could exist outside the rules we depend on? What if borders, laws, and reality itself are less fixed than we believe? What if someone could simply vanish and be remembered forever? The man from Taured lives in discussions, blogs, and videos, inspiring new generations of mystery enthusiasts. Internet forums dissect every detail, questioning, speculating, and imagining scenarios far beyond historical records. And the power of the story is not its truth, but its possibility. A single man navigating our systems with such confidence that he seemed untouchable, that alone fascinates. Add the whispers of alternate realities, time travel, and hidden dimensions, and the legend becomes timeless. Ultimately, the man from Taured teaches us about human curiosity, about our desire to believe in the unexplainable, about the stories we craft when reality is incomplete. He is not a traveler from another world. He is a reminder that mystery thrives wherever certainty ends. And so the tale endures, a man without a country, a story without a conclusion, and a mystery that will always invite us to wonder.